I'm Julian Corner. I'm Chief Executive of Lankelly Chase Foundation. Um, been here 11 years, and I'm here today to talk about our approach to place-based working, what we've learned from it, why we think it's effective, and why we think it's got a lot of lessons that can be used by other funders in their work. The traditional model of a foundation is that we publish criteria, usually based on our priorities for what people need. And then we fund organizations and projects, usually for 3 or 4 years, with some kind of terms of reference between us and the organizations. And whereas place-based work means that we move away from individualized, silo-based understandings of things, and we embrace the interconnectedness of stuff, by which I mean people live in communities, people's challenges and aspirations are interconnected with each other, people's lives are rich and messy and connected, and place-based work tries to recognize that and say people don't live in projects or organizations, people live in communities. And so when we try and resource work that supports people's lives and helps to shift stuff, our resourcing has to acknowledge that interconnectedness, which doesn't mean that projects and organizations shouldn't be funded. Of course they should. But an organization sitting in central London trying to make those decisions on behalf of that community, it doesn't work. The power balance is wrong. We can only see a limited bit of the picture. And it creates a dependency culture on something that's outside of the community. So for us, place-based working means trying to activate networks and communities to be part of the resourcing work. So rather than it just being us deciding on behalf, we work with people who understand, know communities, different organizations. So the resourcing becomes a part of that local system rather than something that sits outside of it. And it's working for us particularly because we're trying to model in our ways of working justice and equity and so forth. Really hard to do those things if you're not yourself connected with the people and lives that are being affected. When we shifted from funding from afar to getting engaged, a whole load of things shifted and became obvious. So one thing, I kind of liken this a bit like, if you look at the sky at night, you see some stars, and you put a telescope there, and you see this suddenly a whole mass of other stars come into view. And that's a bit what it's like being a funder. That when you're at a distance, you see a few stars shining really brightly, but then when you get closer in, shift the telescope, you see that behind those stars are innumerable other stars shining away. We're just not as close to them. And so one of the things that stood out for me from the Common Ground series is how many extraordinary people there are to be connected with, and who are all connected with each other already. And just the richness of that and the vibrancy of that, and how little of our money and other people's money was getting to those people because we either couldn't or wouldn't see them. We just saw the ones who shone most brightly to us. And then because we've only been funding the brightest ones, we haven't been looking at the interconnectedness of all of this, like the relationships, the way that people come together and what not everybody wants to work in competition with each other for resources. A lot of people want to come together and be part of something. So the way that the spaces, but the networks, for the nourishment of those relationships has come out of this work as an absolutely key need of people. You know, we're social beings. We want to be in community with each other. So the way that resources are being used to nourish those spaces has been really, really inspiring, and has this bit about who gets to decide, who's part of this. So, you know, rather than it being me or my trustees or the team at Lankelly, we've got more and more people stepping into feeling able to and free to make decisions about how resourcing gets used. And so we're kind of, all of this intelligence is, which was always there and all, you know, is now surfacing and is being activated in a totally different way, and is being shared in these networks. And you know, I think that one of our hypotheses when we started this is, you know, what does a narrative of a place look like? You know, is it a narrative of scarcity, of defeat, of paternalism, you know, or is it a narrative of innovation, of community, of justice? What is it? And rather than resources being used to keep people separate and in competition with each other, enabling people to create a shared vision that can call them into collective endeavor and ambition, has been, you know, is just incredibly moving. And and we, the local teams that have come together to try and achieve that have more and more tried to center those people who have been subject to marginalization. Because if anybody knows what how a system operates, it's those who have fallen foul of it repeatedly. Those are the people who can see its workings and can see why we get the outcomes that we get. You know, but someone like me sitting on the outside with a lot of privilege, I can do some intellectual analysis of it, but I've rarely been on the receiving end of how systems can grind you down. And activating that is not only, you know, morally the right thing to do, but it is the most effective thing to do as well. I guess also just, you know, just the fact that people have wanted to share their learning, wanted to talk about their local communities, that's been and have done so in fairly vulnerable, open ways, has really revealed the degree to which people want to share their uncertainties. They want to share the fact that this stuff is much bigger than them. You know, that we're all wrestling with crises and, you know, in the world. And so being in conversation and dialogue about how we navigate all of this, you know, this is not easy stuff. When we try and deal with this stuff, it creates tensions between us and within us. And so people sharing that they don't know what the solutions are and that they're trying to work it out together, that is really inspiring, because then you can start to feel hopeful, you know, that we can't plan our way to a better future. We can only work on it together in collaboration. It's required over, you know, because we didn't come into this knowing what to do. And I think, as we've said repeatedly throughout this, we made a lot of mistakes as well as done some good stuff. And I think the thing that we have learned is that the more and more we get connected with people, that we are of community rather than funding community, the more we can be accountable and useful as you know, the holders of the purse strings. You know, that, like, if we are distant from this work, we're always going to get it wrong. But if this work can be increasingly steered by others, so that lots of other people start to hold these purse strings as well, then we're more likely to be effective. But that has required a big shift of mindset from us. We've been around for 60 years. We've done some good work in the past. We've funded loads of amazing people in the past. But what we have increasingly learned is that how you do this work, how you fund, is as important as what you fund. Amazing funding partnerships. But if the way that you went about creating those partnerships, with a very distant, detached posture of objectivity and power over, if you did that, then some of the problem is creeping into the solution. That the problem of power inequality is infecting the solution that you're trying to create. Even if you're funding loads of really great people, there's oppression in there, there's inequity, there's injustice. And so we have tried as best we can to embrace the maxim that, just processes result in just outcomes, that how you do something is important as what you do. But that's required a hell of a lot of learning on our part, really steep learning curve in terms of getting ourselves out of the way, being clear about our own values, our own commitment to justice, and going on a big journey of seeing more and more how much our ownership of money caused us to act in controlling ways. And going on this journey towards realizing this isn't our money, and if we can put this money at the service of communities, then the possibilities become more and more limitless. And it's a question that there's an amazing book called Decolonizing Wealth, and the author of that asks the question, can money heal, not separate? And I guess that's what we're asking in this work. Well, firstly, I think as we've gone along this journey, and of people very candidly feeding back to us where we are in the way and so on. And so I think what this is telling us is that national institutionalized funding models don't serve communities well. And so what we're trying to understand at the moment is how much more change and transformation is needed in Lankelly so that power and control can shift. And what's our role in that? Because we have an amazing position of privilege, so that we can create space for people to feel free to act in different ways, but we don't want to control that space. We want to be allies. We want to work in solidarity, but getting that balance right and being of service and being of use. So we are going to be trying to draw as much wisdom from our network as we can in helping us to understand how do we shift the Lankelly model so that increasingly the resourcing is in the hands of those who should be holding it and controlling it. And that's us trying to disrupt practically a 19th century model of philanthropy, and understand, well, what does a 21st century model of resourcing great work looks like that kind of embraces the complexity of this, but keeps everybody feeling like they've got a stake in it, that they belong to something rather than subject to something. But I think a lot of foundations are increasingly wrestling with issues of accountability, and trying to understand who they're accountable to, because we've been very distant, very much behind, taking decisions behind closed doors about other organisations. And I think this, I mean, we're not saying that we're modelling the answer here. What we're trying to do is disrupt business as usual and try and do something different and try and let more influence into this system, because it has been a very closed system. And so I think what we're, what we like to engage other funders in is a question of, what is all this building towards? What does a funding ecosystem look like in the UK, which genuinely works for communities? This is one part of the picture of funders leaning into and towards community and trying to build connection and trust and relationships, to see where that takes us, and to go on a journey that starts with not knowing where you're going to end up. And so I think it does require us and other funders to take more risks, to allow others to have a much bigger stake in our work, and to recognize that at the end of the day, most of the outcomes that we're hoping for with this work are achieved in everyday interactions between people in their communities, and with the systems and services that they use, and that our money should honor that. This is not easy, and it has to be worked out in real time, in real life situations, not on a piece of paper in our heads. So it's really, we are living in the midst of multiple interconnected meta crises in the world. It requires us to act differently if we're going to get different outcomes. And so it's kind of, we're going to have to take some risks and be bold. But boldness doesn't mean taking risks in a unilateral way. Boldness means letting go of a lot of our organizational constraints and power, and working with deep collaboration and dialogue. Communities have come together to hold responsibility, in a sense, for Lankelly's resources and direct them and so forth. And I think that is charting the way for us to understand that if Lankelly is going to be an accountable, useful part of networks and movements and so forth in the future, it itself needs to be held and owned by a wider group of people. Because the model of philanthropy is that the money is held over here, is invested through a capitalist system, and the proceeds come back out. It's an extractive model. Capitalism extracts the money, foundations turn it into charitable funds, and then put it back into communities, but with a power over model. And this is trying to say, how do we transform our relationship with money and capital so that it isn't extracted from communities and then given back, that communities genuinely own their own means, and so that they can self-determine. Now, Lankelly is a small foundation in the scheme of things, but the best that we can do is take risks and model and create space for different ideas to emerge, which will hopefully then influence other foundations. But we are absolutely clear that we're prepared to put our own organizational model at stake, and so that whatever transformation is needed can happen at a Lankelly level that will hopefully then ripple out into the rest of the system.